Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai, hoki mai, anoa. If you have joined us before with Board Talks, welcome back, and if you're new to Board Talks, welcome. Kia ora, ko waio. I'm Rose Hiha-Ike. I'm the CEO of Community Governance Aotearoa. We're a national charity. And just as everyone's been joining, so thank you. We've had a great response to this last talk for 2025, since the last Board Talk of the year, but it's going to be a good one. Just got a bit of housekeeping. If you could please keep yourself on mute. But feel free to pop in. If you've got a question, got a comment, use our chat function, please. And as we progress, we'll go through and answer questions as best we can. So thank you. And if you would like, we just as more people are joining, if you just want to share where you're calling in from or what organisation you represent, that'll be covered. Pop that in the chat. Love to hear from everyone. So I've got a really great board talk topic today, which is around strategy, relationships, partnerships. If you haven't already finished your kind of strategic review or focus areas, you might be starting it in the new year, so this is a good one for you. And we've got a great panel lineup, so I'm looking forward to hearing from them shortly. Board talks, we've had over 6,600 or so registrations since launching Board Talks. It's about 4 years ago. Every 2 months, you can watch all of our past talks on our website under our talks and events page, and you can also, if you want to, listen in on Spotify. So these are just informal conversations with thought leaders, people that are in our community sector or around or support us. And so it's a chance for you to ask questions that you want to know. We like to get straight into it on Board Talks, so I am going to introduce our wonderful panel for today. They're representing some fantastic organisations. They're big leaders in all chairs, so congratulations. They're the ones taking on a lot of workload, so well done. But we'll start off with Tony and then Glen into Graham, if you'd like to introduce yourselves. And also maybe I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit, what's your a family Christmas tradition, if you want to share that with us. So over to you, Tony.
Kia ora. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tony Shaw. I'm currently chair of IHC New Zealand. As many of you will know, large New Zealand charity. That's the position I've held for the last 6 years. I was previously New Zealand president back in the early 2000s. I've been involved with the organisation for 40 plus years. Started when I was a young lawyer in Timaru, aged about 25, and they haven't let me go. IHC is a large organisation. I chair the parent company, IHC New Zealand Incorporated. We have a large services company called Idea Services, circa $400 million a year turnover. And there is a large property company called Accessible Properties Limited. I see there's 2 of my fellow directors on that board also here. For Christmas, my wife and I were just talking about that. We're currently alone. Our kids come down here every second year. They're not coming this year because they're with in-laws, so we're alone, but I'm sure that won't last long.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Tony.
Ka pai Rose, kia ora tātou, ko Glen Livingstone, tōku e ngō, mere kere he mete. Not far away, is it? So 20 days. I have been the chair of the Rātā Foundation until slightly less than 48 hours ago, when I nominated Josiah Tuala-Mali'i to succeed me. I've had 2 terms at that. I thought that was enough. At the moment, I'm the convener of the combined community trusts. So there are 12 community trusts in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we rotate the conveners as well. So there are kind of 2 buckets of involvement there by way of the trusts. The Rātā board. We're all Crown appointees, as with all the boards, and there are 12 of us. So that's big in board standards. For Christmas, we have had a whole run of grandchildren this year. So we already have a 3 and a 2-year-old, and now 3 babies have appeared, including one due on the 18th. So to be honest, our Christmas is a bit unpredictable, Rose. We're just going to, roll go with the flow, and we'll probably end up minding the 3-year-old at one point. So it will just, we're just all happy to see what happens.
Nice. Well, congratulations and
Thank you. Yeah.
all the best. So lovely. Thank you. And to you, Graham. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Graham Scott toka ingoa no te whanganui Aotearoa aho. I'm very pleased to be here. I haven't worked with this organisation before, but I've been studying it in preparation for this. I think I've had a number of roles in governance over a very long career, but I think the main reason that I was invited is because I'm the chair of the Social Investment Board, which is an organisation appointed by the government, a group of mostly activists and people with long experience in social service delivery in communities. And its role is advising ministers and also the Social Investment Agency. We do not execute, we are advisors, but we work closely with both the Minister and particularly the Social Investment Agency in developing the concepts and thinking through the rollout of the Social Investment Initiative.
Yes, very timely to have you, but welcome, Graham. So this talk is all about strategy and building our partnerships, and also we're going to get into, when it's good or bad and all that kind of thing. But I just want to start with the first part, which is, what does good strategy look like for your board? So thinking about organisations that you're chairing or have chaired, so Glen's example is, what does good strategy look like that you'd like to share? Who'd like to kick us off? Okay, thank you, Tony, for volunteering.
Okay. I think the starting point is to recognise that strategy is what guides your organisation. And so an organisation needs to have a strategy that is clear and sets out an understanding of the organisation's purpose and vision. So you need to ask yourself the fundamental questions. Why do we exist? What impact do we seek to have? And that strategy should articulate a compelling vision for the future. It must be informed by robust analysis, and IHC's just spent the last about 9 months resetting its strategy. And the first thing that we did was embarked on quite a lengthy and fulsome process to find out from our members and stakeholders exactly what they wanted. And that was the key, because we heard some fairly compelling comments made, especially by the people we serve, that is the people with intellectual disabilities, that they wanted a greater say in their lives and where they lived, how they lived, what work they could get and the like. So we also relied on a data set called IDI. Some of you might be aware of it. It basically can hook into all the New Zealand stats information. But we had arranged for some research to be undertaken just into the disability sector. And we've got some compelling information from that. So as we have done, when you're setting the strategy, make sure that you get all the information that you can possibly get to inform you as to where you're going to go. We asked not only our members, but stakeholders as well, because we have relationships with a number of community organisations and, of course, the Crown, who are our main funder. And then I think good strategy, once it's been set, has to be communicated. And unless you tell your membership what you're doing and why you're doing it and bring them on board, then you're not going to get far very, very quickly. So that's a key role that the board plays in then making sure that that strategy is communicated well and properly to the members and that you bring them along with you. That's my 2 minutes worth on that, Rose.
Yeah, that's great. I think if we can have did you say the IDI? Because that would be,
yes,
come across the data and stats, and yeah, it's very valuable about setting One, understanding your audience impacts and trends. So yeah, we might touch on that a little bit later, but thank you for sharing that.
It's an amazing database. So, for example, they could tell us how many people with an intellectual disability reside in Ashburton. And for the Ashburton branch or association of IHC, that was news to them. They were only scratching the surface in terms of the people that they're providing services to. So it's an amazing database.
Great, thank you for sharing. Graham, you've also done some work about data. How do you see that informing strategy for organisations?
Look, it's hugely important, Rose, and probably something we could elaborate on. But to answer your basic question about what does good strategy look like, certainly data is hugely important, but there are prior questions about why you're doing it at all. And something I've seen a lot of is a sort of performative strategy development where there's a process you can go through, facilitated either by your own people or by a consultant, which leads you to a document which is quite compelling. Superficially, it covers vision and values and purpose and why we're here, what does success look like. But it's too easy for these things to be pasted over the top of an organisation and have not much influence on it. I can think of numerous examples where I've seen this in government organisations. So keep in mind that the strategy is only going to work if it goes with the grain, the warp and the weft of your organisation, that it's a summary of who you are, where you're at now, what your aspirations are, and it's expressed in the language and concepts that you use in your daily work. Remember, there's a lot of fast-moving modern organisations that don't do strategy in the sense we've just talked about. It slows them down. They're reacting quickly to changing environments. And the problem with a strategy is it can tie you to what seemed a good idea last year, and you're still sort of stuck with it. Now, most of what we're doing in social services isn't quite like a San Francisco IT startup, but there's still a message in there about not starting off with the assumption that you don't have a strategy. A well-run organisation can have a very good sense of why it's there and what it's doing, and gluing itself to its stakeholders, motivating its staff, problem solving day by day, and they just don't get around to a formal process of strategic planning, but boy, they're strategically oriented to why they're there. So there's just a bit of a warning about not doing performative strategic planning, but making sure that it comes out of the culture of your organisation. And there's a slogan that the management consultants use, you've probably all heard, that culture eats strategy. And if the strategy doesn't grow out of who you are and what you're doing, then it's just going to get ignored. So the place of data within that, for a large organisation like Nix, it's hugely valuable because you're communicating across very large numbers of people with a very large base of people you're servicing. But there's an awful lot of very valuable non-profit organisations out there that are small. They know perfectly well who the target population they're serving is. They see them regularly. They know exactly who they are and what services they're providing for them. And it's just important, I think, not to mislead a small, well-functioning organisation into thinking it doesn't already have a good sense of purpose, in which case strategic planning is about recording that because your stakeholders probably want to know about it. But there's a lot of people out there working with vulnerable families who could care less whether there's a strategy or not. They're interested in the service they're getting and whatever's the best way for them to get it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Graham. I definitely agree about sometimes I've seen a lot of strategic planning and taking up a lot of the board time, especially in our small organisations. Now, when you're volunteers and you're, well, it feels like work, I wouldn't say we call ourselves volunteers and boards, but it can overrun and kind of not focus in on what the key issues or challenges might be. So there's the bigger vision of setting the strategy and where the direction of travel and that kind of thing. But sometimes that taking up the strategic planning and timing for the board means that you're not really focusing in on the short-term problems and issues that you kind of need to get to too. So yeah, I think it's a means to an end, but doesn't have to be all-encompassing for the board's time, especially when we're very busy people in our sector. So
Something I found when I was Secretary of the Treasury many years ago was how important it was to have an agenda item for a board meeting that was early in the meeting, which was a strategic issue that you knew you had to deal with, or just a check. Is there anything we know that says we're off the track we should be on? And just insist that every board meeting covers that issue before you go on and deal with the daily business that has to be attended to. That helps you avoid the important being crowded out by the urgent.
right, I'll just hand over to you, Glenn, around that strategy. What do you think?
Thanks, I'd actually like to use an analogy to describe what for me is good strategy, and this is over several boards and reflecting on that. And for me, having done a bit of multi-sport, including kayaking, for me, good strategy looks like the rudders in the water. So I used to own a kayak where when you sit, you launch, you sat on the water, and then you pulled this drawstring to get the rudder actually in the water, because when you've got it on the land, it could get maybe damaged or hits things. So what happens is, for me, good strategy looks like the rudder in the waka is in the water, which provides direction, power, and speed. So when I've sat on the water, here it's Kerr's Reach on the Avon or Takaro River, you're kind of floating there and you drift. But as soon as you pull that drawstring and put your rudder in the water, you've got direction, power, and speed. And conversely, when the rudder's not in the water, the waka experiences yaw, as with an aeroplane going from side to side. So I think for me, that's the best way to describe it. If I'm going to land on one word, it's that which Tony mentioned, which is clarity. So when your rudder is in the water of your waka, you have clarity. You know your direction. And I have a self-made definition. In other words, good strategy is clarity of direction based on a map with values, which Graham's talked about, and a moral compass, which has a true north. And the converse is true. If you don't have that, you're blown about by every shifting wind, So here at Rātā, in the old days, we've said we used to be a bit like an FPOS machine, giving out money to all and sundry. Well, now we have clarity of direction because we've worked out what are our values and then our strategy gone from there. Just one more point, if I can make it. When it comes to the board's critical to delivering on that good strategy. Again, going back to the kayak analogy, if you get in a double or a duo kayak, the person behind is out of sync with the paddler in the front. The boat goes from side to side and it loses speed and power and direction. So again, sounds a bit cliched, I know, but you actually do need to be paddling in sync. That's not to say there might be the odd exchange of words, but as long as you're paddling in sync, you'll go really well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Glenn. I think so. Moving from the high level kind of vision, and you've set out your strategy, set out your purpose, and all vision, purpose, mission, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But where do we move into when you all three of you have been in this some leadership over organisations quite some time? But where do you go from the strategic ideas or initiatives to what's really made a difference? So reflecting back when you've set the strategic vision and purpose, what can you say were some real deliverables? So moving from that strategic to delivery, what's some examples that you might want to share?
Yeah, that's to me, Rose, or was it Graham? Okay. I guess with Rātā, we landed on our strategy being pursuing equity and sustainability under the kōrero te tiriti. So, and then cascading from that or holding that 4 housing, health, education, and environment. And just landing on that, especially with a big board of 12, has really helped. It means there's good in-depth discussion, but it's sped things up, rather than being all over the place and arbitrary. What are we going to do today? Here's a paper, here's an initiative, here's what we want to do. In housing, so far in the last 4 years since landing on that strategy, we've housed 280 families in Canterbury, Nelson Marlborough, and the Chathams. In health, we're into the mental health space with My Health Foundation. Prior to that, we 50% funded a helicopter pad on top of the Christchurch Hospital. In education, we've got good research that finds actually it's the school transitions time, especially for our Māori and Pasifika people. That's really critical to get right for their well-being in education and environment. We're doing our own stuff, but also working in tandem with the combined community trusts.
Nice. And so, Tony, what's over your time of chairing, say, IHC, especially a significant organisation, can imagine you've got all different responsibilities, branches, staff, delivery services. It's a huge organisation. So, what's some things that you've learned over the years where you had to adjust in setting your strategy and then thinking, oh, we probably should have maybe looked at that a bit earlier?
One of the things that we did some years ago, and this was during the interregnum period when I wasn't board chair, we formed a committee called a Board Appointments Committee, and it became responsible for appointing directors to the main board and to recommending the appointment of directors to the subsidiary boards. Because in the past there had been many well-intentioned, often parents of people with intellectual disability putting their names up, but it became clear that many people were getting appointed to the boards that lacked the ability to act as a good director of, as I say, a $400 million a year business or a property company with $1.6 or $7 billion worth of assets. So the directors that we appointed to the 3 boards were all, I think, excellent directors, but we lost sight of the fact, I think, of why we existed, and that is to provide services and to advocate for people with intellectual disability. So when we did the strategic review this year, we had a very clear message that people with intellectual disability wanted a greater say in governance of the organisation. Now, we've struggled with that for the reasons that I've just touched on, that by their very definition, people with an intellectual disability don't function at the highest level and, with all due respect, lack the ability to have a meaningful say around a board table. So we've had to look at other strategies to give or let their voices to be heard. One of the things that we've done is we've amended our constitution to provide that the member council, which is a committee which serves as the conduit between the members and the boards, that has to have at least 2 people on it with an intellectual disability. The other key change we've made this year at the behest of our new chief executive is he's formed a CE advisory group, and that is largely comprised of people that we support and people with an intellectual disability. So that is providing, and hopefully will continue to provide, a very meaningful mechanism for people that we support having a say in the governance of the organisation. There would be some who would say we still haven't gone far enough, but we're starting to move in the right direction. I guess the other strategy that we've adopted on the back of ongoing concerns being raised by members about a property company. IHC formed a property company some years back and to provide community housing. And so it purchased the state houses, as they were known, in Tauranga. So we are the biggest provider of community housing in New Zealand behind kōrero. But the members were saying to us, why are you throwing so much money into community housing when most of the state housing tenants weren't people with an intellectual disability, when you should be putting that money into our own properties and into services? We listened to that. It became loud and clear as we listened to those voices. So we've changed the strategic ambit of what the accessible property company is doing. We are not pursuing the growth strategy that it had of acquiring up to 5,000 state houses or community houses. And we are pulling things right back and focusing more and more on the people that we support and the housing that we provide to them. So they are strategies that I think are a clear response to what our members have been saying to us.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Tony, because there's been a lot, when I reflect on what's been happening in the governance sector, there seems to be a big spotlight on the sporting sector. So where that intersection between those who govern and membership organisations and maybe not feeding up, listening to grassroots voice, that lived experience. So I've actually had quite a few interactions with different boards that have people with disabilities and things, and the challenge has been of how do they govern when someone's sick, and they were looking for different ways to do that, and some of it was having a family member who might be able to sit in with them. So I appreciate that oversight of it. So
we certainly, our constitution provides that there'll be people on the board with a lived experience of intellectual disability, and we've got 2 or 3 parents, but that in itself wasn't enough. We tried having a person with an intellectual disability on the board and have them supported. That didn't really work either. So I've been saying for years there is a disconnect between the members and the people we support and the board. We've started the journey, but I think we've still got a long way to go.
I think, it's part and parcel of having different, branches, in such a big reach, is making sure that you communicate well, but that kind of leads us into that partnerships collaboration. So I just want to hand over to you, Graham, and your role with the Social Investment Advisory Board. And just around what's the makeup there, and how do you seek out the voice of our sector, our community sector, into your delivery and strategic focus?
Well, the board members come from it. I have a background in public policy and other things, but I was also chairman of the Health Funding Authority and have connections through the health system. But primarily the way we do that is just the people are on the board with the networks they bring with them, and that the Social Investment Agency is the one that's out and around consulting in communities, because the board isn't resourced to do that, but it is deeply connected into those communities and represents them very strongly, in particular Māori communities. I'd like to key off one of the comments that Nick just made about discovering that what they were doing that used to seem the right thing to do with housing actually wasn't, and the stakeholders told them that. I'd just like to emphasise for the people you've invited here today an essential element of what social investment actually is and what it's intended to do, and there's an awful lot of learning to be done about how to honour this intention. But what is it intended to do is to solve a crucial problem in the status quo of the way in which social services are delivered. And if you think about it, it starts at the top. A minister gets elected, Parliament gives him or her an appropriation to spend on services. That money is then managed by that minister's ministry. And they spend a lot of it on their own services, but a certain proportion of it is contracted out to your members. And so the nature of that contracting is that it emphasizes delivering the service and underestimates what impact those services actually had on the people that you're concerned for. Now, in a lot of places, the status quo works fine, but in the places where it doesn't, the following happens. The minister's happy because she got the money. The ministry's happy because they've administered it and let contracts out to providers to produce services. And the providers are happy within, they probably all wanted more money, but they're happy in the sense that they were rewarded for delivering the service they were asked to deliver. Now, let me give you one powerful example of where this goes wrong. In the days before the Employment Service was fully integrated into Ministry of Social Development, it was at arm's length, and it had contracts that came through social welfare to assist people who are unemployed. And so the kind of thing it did was offer people skills in writing CVs to apply for a job, coach them in job interviews. You might even buy some nice looking clothes for somebody who couldn't afford them. And the consequence of this was that the Employment Service's strong incentive was to spend their money on people who were just short of getting a job, the easy cases, and ignore the hard cases, people who are most unlikely to get a job without a lot more assistance. And what we discovered using the IDI, which you've mentioned already twice here today, was that 90% of the money that was being spent in these employment services was being spent on the easy cases, and the hard cases were being shifted over onto other public services like sickness benefits and so on. So by changing the objective from just delivering those services to lowering the long-term costs to the government of the people who were presenting as unemployed, using an actuary to do that, it completely changed the incentives. And so the Employment Service began focusing its resources on the people who were the hard cases and moved it away from people, many of whom were going to get a job anyway. So it's a nice example of using data to expose the fact that the performance objective you were working to wasn't actually in the interests of the people you were really trying to solve. Now that example illustrates in a fairly simple way the fundamental idea behind social investment. So I'd sort of warmly endorse the emphasis that Mick put on being very clear what success looks like, and don't make life easy for yourself and leave a lot of people you should be servicing unassisted.
Graham,
Yeah.
I think you've been referring to me as Nick. Is it me you're referring to as Nick? It's Tony.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have my glasses on. You're right. It's a tiny wee name up the top there.
That's all right.
My apologies, Tony.
No need to apologise.
Yeah, thanks for that, Graham. I mean, it's we've run several events over the last few years, and we've had really huge uptake and by our community sector who've facing challenging times. They're right at the forefront of what Aotearoa New Zealand communities need. So, to Tony Shaw and IHC, so right on the forefront of delivery, and things have been getting tough and hard. We have surveyed this year in June, July, and we know from over 200 respondents that over 50% have lost some majority of funding, if not stopping program services, that kind of thing. So it's a very challenging time, and everyone's had to kind of rein it back in as much as they can and look to keep the lights on, and some haven't. Some of the other charities, organisations haven't managed to survive it through. So appreciate your example. I'm sure it's not going to solve what everyone is looking for. I think what I mentioned about some events is that I presented an alternative, which is the Ministry for Not-for-Profit. So if we can have one for hunting and fishing or whatever, we could have our own ministry. So put that out there a bit tongue-in-cheek, but that's, it is difficult for many of our organisations that are seeking funding and going to different ministries and different responsibilities. But so talking about our kind of strategic focus, but then we've moved into the grants and funding and things like that. So what I have found over this time is that the strongest partnerships they're worth their weight in gold, essentially. So if you've got really good, strong partnerships with funders and whether it's sponsors or your those who donate to your organisation. So could you just share a bit, maybe we'll go to you, Glen, around how do you create and maintain those strong partnerships that are going to deliver those impacts? And have you got some thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. I guess it's as with any relationship, it's an ongoing thing. It's a dynamic. So I encourage people contact me, for instance, and say, well, look, let's set up a face-to-face. If they can do that here in Christchurch, if possible. Something we have learned, and which I learned in my early days coming onto Rātā, was through Steve Meditor. When it came to engagement in our community, I guess there's been an assumption that along with the other community trusts, and I wish to acknowledge my colleagues who are chairs here on the Zoom, when it comes to many of the trusts, I guess there's a kind of a prior assumption that because the trusts have the funding, organisations go to them. But we've also learned, especially with iwi, that it's relationship first, funding second. So you can't always, I think we're just got to be aware of some of our cultural assumptions that it doesn't always, just look at things through cultural eyes. We've got to be aware of our own assumptions which we carry, and that relationships are two-way, even if you are the fund holder. So what we've done is seek out partnerships also at a higher level, not only with iwi, but also the councils, so that when it comes to funding, when it comes to conversations with lenders, it's who goes first. So if, say, Rātā goes first or the Christchurch City Council goes first, that gives confidence. And then others come on board too. And that's good for our organisations. My sister just rang me halfway through that, so I got a bit distracted. And I've just turned my phone off. So could you just check I've answered the question there, Rose?
Yes, no, thank you. Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So in your example, you're talking about kind of when established organisation is partnering, so it gives a bit of kudos, right? So
yes, it does.
So Tony, from your perspective, have you faced challenges, especially over the last, say, 18 months in your
I wouldn't in terms of collaborations or partnerships, no, I wouldn't say so, but harking back to what Glen has said, I think if you're going to get to bed with somebody, you've got to know them and trust them. So you must have clearly aligned goals and philosophy and culture. And if you're at that point, then the relationship is far more likely to succeed. If you don't have goals that are aligned with one another, if you don't trust the other organisation, if you don't have mutual trust and respect, and you're not a cultural fit, then it's probably not going to work. So I think that's the key matter you should focus on before you jump into bed with somebody. And once you're at that point, you then need to make sure that you've got clearly aligned goals and expectations, regular and open communication, and things should work okay.
Okay, that sounds good. What happens when it turns to custard. So we're close to Christmas, and it's a little bit of an opinion piece recently about the treating a last board meeting like a Christmas dinner. So it could either be really good and fun, it also might maybe end in a big fight or argument. So taking on that, like I'm sure all three of you would have seen some interesting times. But what happens when we go off kilter and there might be a crisis, there might be something has happened, it's something quite significant. How do you kind of bring that back into perspective, and with the collaborations with partners, because whatever affects your organisation has a flow-on effect, right? So have you managed anything like that?
I can give you an example, not with somebody that we had partnered with, but with our then funder, the Ministry of Disabled Persons, Whaikaha. And we were reliant on negotiating a new contract with them that was going to keep our whole services arm going, as I say, circa 400 million a year. We had a issue with them in the sense that we'd had a lady, elderly lady, die in one of our houses from drowning in a bath. And there were all sorts of issues around that. We're prosecuted under the work safety legislation and the like. But one of the decisions that the chief executive made the call, but wholly supported by the board, was that to keep people safe, we decided to remove all the baths from our houses. Now, that was a significant announcement that we made. We had a number of families who were not happy with that. The ministry took it upon themselves to say, this is a human rights issue. Everybody's entitled to have a bath, completely ignoring the fact that those of you who might be involved in the aged care business will know that you don't have baths in old people's homes because it's just too difficult to get them in and out. We relied on opinion from a very senior barrister that for health and safety reasons we should remove the baths because we were understaffed. We couldn't have two of our staff looking after a person when they're having a bath that was unsafe, so we took the baths out. Whaikaha's response to that was to threaten us with removal of our funding. And they weren't going to give us a new contract. Now, when you think about it, that would have been catastrophic, I think, for them as well as for us. But we stuck to our guns on our philosophy of doing everything that we can do to protect the people that we support. And so we basically went into bat and had significant issues with Whaikaha. They finally folded at the knees and gave us a new contract, and away they went. But I just think there are some circumstances where if things are going wrong with somebody that you're partnering with or with a fund or whatever, you've got to be prepared to stick to your philosophy about what you're doing. And we possibly put our whole contract in jeopardy by sticking to our guns over the issue, but I believe it was the right thing to do. You've got to be brave.
Yeah, that's a great example and challenging in many respects. So yeah, thank you for sharing that with everyone. Often on the flip side, for a small organisation, it's very difficult to hold that weight, like Glen talked about. One big organisation going in another. So that's the challenge of many of our smaller organisations are. Like someone's mentioned in the chat, they don't have any managers, they're volunteer organisations, they're running on the smell of oily rag kind of thing. So having that kind of mana and that leverage is not quite there. So that's on a
Sure.
challenge, yeah.
Just one thing that I would say to all those smaller organisations. I started with IHC, as I say, as a young lawyer on the branch committee. There were 10 or so parents, well-intentioned, but again, probably lacking many of the skills. And this was just running the branch. I came on board and they were very grateful that I did. And I often say to people, look around your community, approach a young accountant or a lawyer or some whiz kid and ask them to come on as part of their community obligations to come and help you out. And it's amazing how much benefit can then be provided by having a legal mind around the table, by having somebody with good financial accounting skills. It's a step in the right direction for the organisation. It's often a leg up for those young individuals too. I know when my son joined a law firm in Christchurch, he was required to get into some sort of social good role just as part of the firm's social obligation to the community. So there may be people in your towns and cities that if you tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, it would be great if we could have a young lawyer or accountant on our committee, would you please come and help us?
Yeah, you'd be surprised how much talent is just in your local community. So yeah, sometimes just having a coffee and a chat and ask. Just over to you, Graham, on the funding environment that you are in, about what happens when there has been, there's been some kind of big challenge that I would say that social investment agencies face, but how do you continue onwards and upwards and work through that?
Yes, I mean, the events surrounding Andrew Costa have come to a conclusion. He effectively managed the SIA in the time he was there, albeit in a style that reflected his history as a manager. But what is clear is that the staff in there scarcely missed a beat. I mean, for a week or so, obviously there was great uncertainty, in fact more than a week, but that's now cleared. And the staff in there have just had their continued to work hard on the work that they were assigned. The acting head of the organisation, Alistair Mason, is very competent and has long experience with social policy and the various things he's done. And my board is drawn closer to the SIA to be sure that anything that we can provide them with by way of support and advice is available to them. And just this week, our board reached an agreement with the SIA about a list of key topics that needed to be worked on in the next few months. And they set up little working parties together to do that. I need to emphasise again that my board does not have executive authority over this. That rests with the acting chief executive and with Minister Willis. But this unfortunate situation is behind the organisation and it's powering ahead, albeit with a very challenging mandate. One thing I might just take a moment to mention to you is that this question of partners is going to subtly change for those who are involved in money that comes through a social investment pathway. Because the very essence of social investment is to delegate decision-making about the details of how services are designed and implemented, to delegate more of those decisions down the hierarchy to organisations that are close to the people who are intended to benefit from these services. And what that will mean is that some of the partnerships you're talking about will eventually merge into being, well, collective impact vehicles, for those of you who know what I mean by that. But if you're going to have a service delivered to a group of whānau in a particular situation somewhere around the country, but in advance you don't know exactly what is the service that they need, that's going to be decided on the ground by the people who are in contact with them, that it creates a kind of collective between people who might, until that point, have been at arm's length, but they're now being asked together to think about how to do this. And the best example of it so far, I think, has been the way Whanaora was intended to work until it was shifted more to a navigator model recently. But it's just something to keep in mind that some of the funding streams will be aiming to delegate decisions into people who will have to come together more as collectives than as individual service providers. And so over the years ahead, there will be a kind of gentle pressure to move in that direction.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Graham. You've already seen that somewhat with the health coalitions. It's basically had to merge into significant regions to deliver upon service deliveries for health and wellbeing and things like that. So yeah, those bigger, wider regional structures have kind of already been set. So I guess I hear what you're saying about moving these conversations that are happening, and we've got a case study around amalgamation for organisations. I think there's place and time for certain decisions to be made like that if organisations are struggling. So yeah, thank you for sharing that direction as well. So got about a few minutes before we wrap up, and Glenn shared something, the Johari window. It's a good tool for boards.
Can I, you're asking me, Rose, just over, Can I just touch on what Graham said very quickly with relation to police? This is me looking at this from the outside. I don't have direct line of sight, I guess, like most of us here, for things, groupthink and blind spots. Probably not hard to work those out. And I'll try and segue that into what I'd like to say. With Rātā, we'd invited, and we have several councils within our takiwa, we'd invited the Christchurch City Council, where Rātā is based in Christchurch, in to have a cup of tea with us. We literally sat down in the boardroom, talked about our strategy because they were getting a bit antsy. Government had pulled back on funding. What are you doing? Are you going to help us? Getting a bit tense. And nevertheless, it didn't stop them publicly criticising us at a council meeting. Probably, fortunately for us, only Chris Lynch picked up on that, and he didn't actually get his facts straight. Referred to the chair as the chair of 2 chairs back. So that's how inaccurate he was. But I guess what it taught us was, and I've been a city councillor, I knew, and I still know a lot of these former colleagues, is that Rātā's big in, especially Christchurch where it's based. And I guess I'd made a reasonable assumption that the city councillors would be across what we do, including our new strategy, which by that time was 3 years old. It taught me a few things. One is the blind spot I've just talked about, and the other is clarity in your communication, and that good old kind of, it's not really an acronym, but the word assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. It's a good way to remember it. So I guess for boards, it's really important to keep reflecting on what are our blind spots. And I've put in the message there. Look at the Johari window. It's a good model. And also groupthink. Are we going down the path? Can we ever be pulled into that? That surely must have happened with New Zealand Police when you get 5 or 6 people not elevating what should have been elevated, and it's terrible all around. So communication clarity, get on the front foot. So we got on the front foot after that incident, and I think for a board, do a fire drill. So in other words, a practice run. If someone has a go at us, what are we going to do? What's our comms? What are going to be our key bullet points? So that we can front foot those.
Yeah, that's great, Glenn. Thank you. Because it's something I always sharing with our boards is like, we should, at our level, if you're chairing on a whatever size organisation or your trustee, board member, you should build the confidence to run a strategy session several times a year, take the opportunity, especially in the chair and all chairs here as a leadership role, is that we've got to be able to confidently have that conversation, and we don't always have to look out for a consultant and bring someone external in, because we should have the skill set around to at least have the conversation.
Well, take your stakeholders with you. Tony said that earlier. Take your stakeholders with you. I mean, we thought we had. I think we have. I mean, it hasn't been. Some have not been happy with our strategy. because we're now no longer funding a lot of the things we used to. But look, there comes a point you've got to be true to yourself. And if it annoys some people, it does. But, you've just got to have that clear direction.
I think the other thing that you kind of mentioned though is also don't assume that people know what you're doing. So, you can become quite insular in the board and organisation at the high level and not actually what's happening. Is it being communicated? Where is it? So we talk about stakeholders, partnerships, relationships. Well, it's right down to the person that signs up to your organisation. We've just got a few minutes, but thank you for a fantastic kōrero. I think the last thing I just want to ask is, what do you see being the biggest challenge or the opportunity for the not-for-profit sector next year, moving into 2026? Just all three of you quickly share. Start with you. Go to Graham, then Tony, then
Glenn. Economists should be very wary of forecasting an economy, but I think we are coming to the end of a long and lingering recession. And so I think the conditions will improve marginally, but not enough to make a fundamental difference in how many people are coming to you needing assistance. And so far as social investment is concerned, I would take the opportunity to say that this is probably going to be a long-term change in the way some funding is delivered. Now, the government might change at the end of the year, next year, but at the same time, the sort of example I gave you before about how money was being wasted in the employment service and diverted from the people who really needed it, that is not going to that's not going to be set aside. Methods which address that kind of misallocation of resources are here to stay, and it's happened in part because of the collapse in the cost of information at all levels, but also the government's integrated data infrastructure, which you mentioned, but there'll be a lot of other infrastructure of your own. Don't underestimate the goldmine of data that you're already sitting on. I mean, one organisation I've worked with that does looks after a large proportion of the young people on the Kapiti Coast. Their operational data turned out to have 30 years of information about thousands of people they've dealt with that had never really been analysed deeply about what are the life courses that these young people are on. And now we're able to do that. And so there's just a huge new possibility of using data to make all of this contracted social service far more effective in the places where these distortions have been worse.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that, because just quickly, there's a comment around data and AI and influence from boards. We will be, next year, we'll be announcing board talks. We are going to be kicking off that more around data, so keep an eye out for that. So over to you, Tony.
I think the biggest challenge facing most of the organisations who are in this call today is the money and lack of it, and the financial pressures on everybody. Those pressures are on the government in particular, and so we all know there's been funding cuts left, right and centre. All I can say is that don't despair, don't give up, keep on fighting the battle. Think outside the square. There are other ways now of raising money, whether it's through the likes of a Give a Little page or some sort of crowdfunding, anything that just might be enough to keep you going. But everybody's got to pull their belt in and tighten it up. And one thing I would say is that one of the questions that we didn't have time to get onto is, well, what happens if the funding is not enough? Don't keep going down a hole that you can't get out of. If you need to cut the service or trim back significantly on what you're doing, then that's far better than ending up with debt that you can't repay. So biggest challenge, funding and lack of it. Keep on fighting the battle.
Nice, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Tony. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, Rose. I think, obviously what we've been soaking up at the moment in the kind of wider social discourse is a scarcity mentality. I mean, there's plenty of money out there. It's how it's allocated. And I do have a problem with the fact that inland revenue is revenue. And, you know, anyway, I need to be careful about how I treat politically there, but it's there to be used. I think we do need to adopt an abundance mentality. I think you can discover that through partnerships and good value alignment with funders. So go together. Another challenge, governance, especially for not-for-profit boards, and I want to acknowledge all the organisations here. As I've often said it, Rātā Functions, thank you, because you are the glue of our community. You really do, I think, hold it together. A third challenge, which is also an opportunity, the baby boomer bubble coming through, is both a challenge in terms of housing stress, with many retirees trying to live off the pension and also pay the rent. But it's also an opportunity because that same demographic is what we now call the great wealth transfer. So there is an opportunity through your organisations, through bequests, through wills, having a wills month, etc., whatever, designing a fundraising program, that there could be some good opportunities coming your way.
Thank you. Thanks, Glenn. Yep, with challenges comes opportunities where, you know, we've got to think outside the box. We've got to step in and take ownership of our direction, where we're going and heading, and responsibility for our organisations, taking our management teams along, our community, stakeholders, partners, everyone. So big job, but we've got fantastic community resources around us. I just want to thank everyone that's attended over Board Talks this year. It's been an amazing year. We've had a huge amount of engagement. Thank you if you come every 2 months. Thank you so much for supporting us. Next year we've got a huge range of other content coming, which is all driven by what you tell us that you need with Board Talks. So keep up the good work, fight the good fight, and have a safe Christmas. So mā te wā. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Ka pai.